All right, it's official, people. I'm coming to you guys from my brand new setup. I'll be sure to give you guys a grand tour once it's actually finished and set up, but we're here for the next Talkin TV Variety Hour. Chris, it was a little bit of a slower week, news week. I want to see if you fell for the No Way Home fucking like troll teaser that I've seen a couple times on Facebook, but we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. We got some Conjuring stuff to talk about. We've got some Jupiter's Legacy stuff to talk about. We've got the iCarly trailer reboot finally dropped. Like, we got some stuff to talk about. You excited?
Listen, man, it might be a slow news week, but we still have a jam-packed show for you guys
Yes,
tonight.
we do.
That's for
yes,
sure.
we do. Absolutely. All of that and more on tonight's episode of the Talkin TV Variety Hour. Stay tuned. What's up, man?
Not much, man. Looking forward to tonight. I've been
very
loving
much.
These variety streams.
Yeah,
these
man,
Friday
they've been
nights,
fun.
just sort of kicking it topic to topic, just seeing what kind of comes our way. They've been a lot of fun to plan and prepare for. So
they have been, yeah. Like I said, so far, kind of like my dream and my vision for what I wanted this show to be, as far as giving us like an outlet to like not just make Friday nights exclusively about the Disney content, is working. And apparently, it looks like Disney is listening to us because, like I said, Loki's on Wednesdays now, and they're starting to branch out and starting to do like a little bit more of a variety as far as their schedule shifts go. You know, it really sucks because if there was ever a week that I wanted to talk about Bad Batch, it would be this week, but we've got a lot to talk about, so unfortunately we're going to have to take a little bit of a break from Bad Batch this week, but we'll definitely, I think, be back with it next week overall. But we got a lot of stuff to talk about. You know, as I said, I mentioned, I'm in a new place. I'm in a little bit of a transition right now, but of course that was never going to stop me from showing up to, like I said, as I continue to say, the thing that gives me existence, which is, of course, this podcast that you and I have so diligently put so many years and so many hours into. You know, like it makes me so happy.
Yeah.
You know, it makes me so happy to see this
already, and it's really only just beginning. So
exactly.
You know, I just want to welcome everyone in. Of course, this is the Talkin TV podcast and our third installment of our Friday night variety streams.
Yes,
where we just sort of chat about the topics of the week and
absolutely
just have a chill, casual conversation with you guys. Of course, covering what you want to hear, because that's what we do.
Exactly.
And of course, before we dive into our main topics, please subscribe, hit the like button on this video. It honestly really helps out. Like, I hate being like, oh, always do this, please, please, please. But there's a reason even the people who have millions of subscribers say it. It's because YouTube's a tricky beast, and we want to keep growing. I mean, our community literally has grown from 0 to 325 subs in like a year. So we want more people like you guys to join us. And
absolutely.
That's what it's going to take from you guys, a little bit of help. And of course, hit that bell for notifications, and just know we appreciate it a lot.
Yes, absolutely. And like, Chris, like before we got into tonight's topics, like, I mean, it's been crazy because like so much has happened in this last week. It's kind of crazy. It still only feels like it's been 2 days, but like it's been like a week since I moved. I brought all my stuff here on Monday, and it's already Friday. Like, what have you been up to in the last week? Like, how's it going on the home front right now?
I mean, I've been good. I mean, not much has changed for me. Just really working and obviously working on music, writing something. There's a bit of a spoiler in the background of my set, and I will say no more.
Okay. Oh, now I'm going to be looking at your set for the entire time now in order to try and see if I can spot the spoiler.
Working on a script for Talkin TV. I'll leave it at that. Chipping away at something. You know what it is. But
I do.
Right
Obviously, I know what that is, but I'm contributing to that in order to like build up suspense for the audience. You know,
Professor Pat's involved.
Of course, the Cerulli twins are involved.
Some of your favorites.
Exactly.
I mean, I've been good. I was gonna go see Conjuring 3. The Devil Made Me Do It in theaters tonight, but everyone's kind of seems to be a little tired after this week, so I just I'm just gonna chill and watch it on HBO Max. And it's kind of nice we get that.
Yeah, it's interesting because
last minute I can just sort of put my PJs on and stay at home and not be like, oh man, I'm so tired. I don't want to go to the theater right now. I just worked in the yard all day. I did this, that, and the other thing, but I have to see this movie. There's like the one good thing about the HBO Max of it all.
It's like you never want it to get to the point where it starts to feel like homework, obviously, because that starts to sap the fun. But it is interesting, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit as far as like kind of the box office of it all. But I will say that kind of one thing that I've noticed as far as what's been helping us, certain of these movies that have been doing really well since kind of like, you know, the theaters are starting to open up again and like a little bit of a return of the semblance of normalcy, is I will say that kind of, it's not exactly like this, but because of like the old school mentality, right, of like kind of like every other other week being a streaming drop and then every other week being a theater drop, I will say has definitely, I think, been a big contributor to this. And obviously we saw in the beginning of the year, right, that the simultaneous theater and streaming drop, both first with Godzilla vs. Kong and then a month later with Mortal Kombat, has been tremendously helpful towards properties. But it'll definitely be interesting to see how this weekend with Conjuring as the next big HBO Max drop of the year kind of goes, especially considering that June is, I believe, the only month of the year that we're getting not one but two big HBO Max drops. We've got Conjuring this weekend, and then we've got In the Heights next weekend, which is a very widely anticipated movie, right? It's a big musical. Yeah. Musicals have been on a little bit of a comeback recently, right? And they seem to like do really well in theaters as far as that goes. You know, like I remember La La Land when that came out, that made a big thing. Beauty and the Beast, obviously, everyone was a huge fan of. What's it called? Obviously, Spielberg's got West Side Story coming out later this year. Like, musicals have been on a little bit of a comeback, so that's going to be interesting.
Before you get too much on a side tangent, I want to just speak to the whole like convenience factor of HBO Max.
Right.
Like, it's really nice. Like, you know, today I essentially we had like an issue with our pool. I had to dig out the side of the hot tub, fix the leak, and so I'm just like super drained. And the squad, you know, they were like, hey, we're also not really feeling heading out to the theater, but it's nice to have that option,
right?
But then again, it's like, I think there's a reason that Warner
tricky.
is already sort of parting ways with,
right?
Or sorry, I think there's a reason that HBO's president is stepping down at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And all this type of stuff, you know, like it maybe wasn't the smartest move in hindsight, but like, before we get too far away from it, because you asked me about my week,
yes,
and I was sort of talking about how I had an exhausting week, but a typical week, and the convenience of HBO was perfect for me being able to watch this movie at home. But I mean, you quite literally just moved. So
I don't know how I did it.
You talked to me about it pre-stream, but like, how has your week been?
I really, honestly, I don't know how I've done it.
Factor that into the HBO Max of it.
How I moved all my shit into this room and fucking got, and I've been working and got two Conjuring movies out of the way, bro. Like, I don't even know how I'm with you right now. I don't even know how I'm like not transparent right now. I'm just chalking that up to like my superhuman just kind of tenacity when it comes to getting shit done. You know, like, that's not to toot my own horn. You've literally said, they're like, dude, you have said this to me previously where you're like, dude, I have no idea how you get half the shit that you get done with the amount of stuff that you have doing. And I'm like, I don't know either, dude. I've just been doing it. Like, literally, I pulled up here Monday night, slept, worked Tuesday, and then pretty much every single day since Tuesday has been work during the day, and then progressively packing up my shit, editing, and then moving stuff into my new house. Cause and that's literally just been my existence this past week. Like, I'm sorry, I wish I had more to report, but that's literally all I've been doing. You know, like last night was like the first time that, like,
fine. I mean, then I guess my question is, it's like, we know that from a business standpoint, the HBO Max sort of direct to stream and theaters at the same time thing.
Right.
Well, we were still in the clutches of the pandemic in March, and we had no really answers a month later.
Seemed like a great idea.
Now it seems a bit silly though. So
right.
but for someone like you who like literally had this hectic week, are you like kind of thankful though that this exists?
Well, so it's funny because my whole thought on the HBO Max thing originally was, I thought, cool, you know, for simple fact of, again, forgetting that, leaving out the pandemic, leaving out theaters, right? Obviously with the whole kind of confusion, right? Because I'll attribute that to my mindset more than anything else, right? Is the kind of the overall confusion towards how I was going to watch certain stuff going forward, you know? Because I'm like, I don't want to have to wait until it potentially leaks, or if it gets a streaming release, I'm like, I don't want to have to wait for that, you know? So just seeing that and kind of knowing that we were going to get, at the very least, like 10, 12, not to direct us, not to launch any shame, but like there's a big difference, I feel, now between theatrical movies and straight to streaming movies, and we were going to get, guaranteed, right, Judas and the Black Messiah, Godzilla vs. Kong, Mortal Kombat, New Taylor Sheridan, you know, Dune, Matrix 4, all those big movies, Suicide Squad, at the very least, at the time, it was super satisfying for me as a consumer mentality that, okay, at the very least, I know I'm getting these movies and they're gonna be directly on a streaming service, right?
And when it was normal too.
Right, it was normal still at the time.
It gave you something to look forward to again.
Exactly. That definitely helped. Now that things are starting to get back to normal, as far as the big streaming thing, I will say that, but I always knew this, right? Because again, I've got a different sort of mentality and outlook on this whole thing, right? Because my whole thing, right, is I'm different than everyone else. I don't give a fuck how tired I am. If I gotta watch something, I'm gonna watch it, you know? And if I don't want to watch something, I'm not gonna watch it. It's just that simple, you know? You've dealt with this from me multiple times, you know, where I'm like, you're like, oh, do you need more time to watch it? I'm like, I got it. And you're like, how? You're like, I just did, you know? Like, I literally, like, while I was on work, just bored because there was no one there, I was watching Conjuring 2, like, on fast forward at Netflix. I'm like, I get shit done as far as that goes. You know, like, if there's something that needs to be done, I will get it done. I literally watched Bohemian Rhapsody on a Tuesday night at 10 o'clock at night. I slept through the whole movie, but at the very least, I made the effort to try and go and watch it, you know? So as far as kind of the whole convenience factor and fun factor of a movie, right, that doesn't necessarily apply to me, right? Now, from a business standpoint, I will say that the decision for HBO Max, I always knew was going to be problematic, right? It was always going to be problematic. HBO and Warner has seemingly done nothing but make bad decisions for the last, like, 5 years since the whole Batman vs. Superman disaster. And I'm like, okay, look, I think I even said this at the time when I saw the announcement and when I talked to you about this. I'm like, this is a great decision in the moment, but because at the time, right, we didn't know, right? Now we know, but at the time we didn't, because hindsight is 2020. I'm like, but if things start to get back to normal relatively soon, this is going to become a problem as far as distribution and money-wise goes. And so far, I've been 100% right, because they're already trying to salvage Dune, and they're already trying to salvage Matrix 4. But what I'm confused at is why they're making such a big deal about it as far as money goes, because Godzilla vs. Kong is the highest grossing movie so far this year. And a big part of that is because you were simultaneously able to watch it on streaming while having it in the theater. Same thing with Mortal Kombat, you know? Where obviously those are still only two examples, right? And the fact that we really didn't have a big HBO Max drop in May, right? So we don't have as much to compare to, right? So this month we're going to have two. So I feel like the summer is going to be the real big litmus test as far as to see if this kind of whole weird simultaneous theater drop and streaming drop will continue to work for them, right? Especially since they're really the only ones that have enacted this strategy, right? Because Disney still makes you rent their shit, even if it's on streaming, right? And everything else just goes directly to streaming, you know? It's still, everything else from all the other studios is still only exclusively in theaters or streaming, right? Even Paramount, right? Even though it's got a shortened window before it goes to Paramount Plus, at the very least, it's still only in theaters for those 45 days, you know? So that's the big thing that I've really been looking forward to as far as this whole Warner thing goes.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, time will tell, and the situation will continue to unfold. I totally agree with a majority of your sentiments there. So, while we're speaking about movies that go direct to streaming, we're going to be doing our review of our first main topic tonight. On Monday, it's going to be coming out at your typical time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Of course, that being Conjuring.
The devil made
me do it. So can't wait for that. But of course, we want to set the stage, guys. You all seemed to really like last week when we spoke about our thoughts on The Quiet Place Part 1 before we hit The Quiet Place Part 2. So we figured, hey, we obviously have to watch these two movies anyways, because you don't go into a third film without seeing the first two.
You don't.
You know, that's just weird. So let's talk about our first main topic for the evening, Dom. Let's do like a little look back, a retrospective, if you will, on The Conjuring 1 and 2.
Yeah. Well, first off, I just wanted to give The Conjuring 3 props for being the only other threequel besides John Wick to have a subtitle when the first two didn't. Like, I just find that funny, right? Like, because it's like they either all have subtitles or none of them have subtitles as far as that goes. Or 2 and 3 have the sequels have subtitles, right? But the first one doesn't, right? But John Wick and now this trilogy, they're the only two examples where they don't start adding the subtitles until the third movie. You know, I mean, there have been other examples, right? Like the Alien trilogy, like Alien 3 was only until like Alien 3, because Alien 2 was Aliens, right? And don't even get me fucking started on the Rambo movies. Like, don't even get me started on those titles, because those titles make no goddamn sense, right? The Fast and the Furious, they've kind of got their own thing, right? They're basically a cult at this point. So I just wanted to get that joke out of the way. But man, let me tell you something. So I have been very open and very honest about my hatred of horror cliches. I'm going to say not horror movies, horror cliches, right? I watched one Friday the 13th and I couldn't even finish it. I'm like, this is awful. I'm like, this is terrible. How did this franchise turn out 9 installments that everyone religiously watched? I'm like, this only could have happened in the 80s. This never would have happened. Actually, you know what? I'm wrong, because of course it would have happened today. It just would have only gone directly to streaming. But I'm like,
Side
how?
note, though, I feel like you really can't say that Friday the 13th is a cliche when it set a standard.
But did it set the standard, or did Halloween set the standard, and then Friday the 13th just followed up on it?
Well, it's like, acid rock didn't just start with like the Doors. You needed a few other people to
True,
do it
true.
too. So the Moody Blues came around and the Grateful Dead, and then slowly the early adopters
Okay.
kind of forced
Well,
the.
I'll
That's how I
admit,
see it, at least.
I'll admit it wasn't the first Friday the 13th. I don't remember. I think it was like the fourth or fifth one, which is when they started
Oh
to get
God,
like really
I don't know why I'd
stupid.
even start there.
Yeah,
No, I
dude,
just wanted
the
to
only
get
reason
your-
why is because I was with friends and they were like, "Oh, we should watch a Friday the 13th movie. This is supposedly one of the good ones." And they put on the fourth one. I'm like, "This is terrible."
Yeah,
I'm
I
like,
just felt like
this
someone
opening doesn't
at
even
home
make
was,
sense.
screaming at you when you said that, and they were like, "You need to clarify that." So that's the only reason I butted in. But you were saying, continue.
Yeah,
Please.
so you can imagine my surprise when The Conjuring starts, right? And I know the premise of it, right? Because I'm like, yeah, I watched Hill House. I know how these stories go, you know? And like, I liked Hill House. I didn't love it, right? Because to me, right? Though, but that was weird because even though Hill House did everything right as far as these stories go, the character work, even though it was there, it just didn't feel legit to me. But I'm chalking that up to the Netflix of it, all right? Because we know Netflix is weird with their characterizations. So you can imagine my surprise when not only did I like the first Conjuring, I fucking loved it. I'm like, oh my God, this is doing, you know why? Because it's not just doing the cabin in the woods scream thing of making fun of all the horror tropes and cliches. It's directly addressing them and actually incorporating them into the story, which is a dope ass story, by the way. Like, the scares are actually earned, unlike 90% of these things. And they're actually like, because what's the number one complaint? And I know you know, what's the number one complaint that you always hear about in haunted house movies? Why do the people not leave immediately when the house is haunted? But you can imagine my shock when immediately
It's like
they
that Geico
address
commercial.
why the family. Thank you. You can imagine my surprise when immediately the family and like the situation addresses like why these characters don't leave, and it automatically shows. I'm like, oh no, okay, this is actually like not concerned with trying to make something that's like appealing to the tweeters and the redditors, right? It's actually concerned with making a movie. And it makes sense because it came out in 2013, right? Which I would argue is probably the last year before Twitter really contaminated the movie sphere, right? Because even though we still got some great movies between 2014 and 2015 before it started to go downhill quality-wise in 2016, right? There was the Twitter sphere was like starting to get up there, right? But 2013, I would say, was the last year really where we could get like pure cinema, let's call it, before the internet really infected it. And The Conjuring was, I mean, I wrote this in my review, right? It helps that it's based on a true story, and the fact that, like, because I remember back in the day when I watched Schmoes religiously that they had the writers of the movies on, and the writers talked in detail about how much research they did and how they did the interviews with the real Ed and Lorraine Warren as far as that goes. And you can feel all of that in this movie, right? And it all kind of creates for this experience that really, in my opinion, elevates the genre up above the rest in ways that I had not seen coming. But the reason also why I'm so impressed is because unlike a lot of the horror movies that I've liked, where a lot of the horror movies that I've liked have been not straight up horror movies, they've either been deconstructionist or other genre movies that include horror elements, right? Like Shaun of the Dead is not really a zombie horror movie. It's more of a comedy that has zombies in it, right? The Thing is more so like a mystery kind of closeted thriller that happens to have this creature in it, you know? Those are the types of horror movies that I gravitate towards. But this was a straight up haunted house horror movie where for the first time ever, I actually cared about the characters. They felt like real people and the scares were actually utilized effectively, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally I can see all that. I think these movies were really well made. I think
Yes.
now that I've seen quite a handful of James Wan films, I think it totally makes sense how he is so in the horror verse and then can go to Aquaman and have one of $52 billion movies on his resume almost seamlessly. Because I think it's filmmakers have their passions, like John Carpenter predominantly stayed in the horror realm, but when he went on to do movies that were outside of that genre, he had hits too. And I think it's just filmmakers are good filmmakers when they can make everything that they watch at least somewhat enjoyable. Now, I say all that because I personally love haunted houses. I love haunted house movies. I love movies, horror movies rather, that make you really feel like Halloween. Like I'll go for some of like the more abstract ones like Candyman and all that. And I actually really enjoyed Candyman when we did that last October for our Shocktober event.
That was
Which,
fun.
spoiler alert, another Shocktober coming. Every year they come, so look forward to that, guys. But you know, it's like the movies that I really love are like, and the stories that I really love are like the ones that make you feel like it's Halloween. And so I found it difficult for me to understand what it was about these movies, separating them from being movies that I really liked to movies that I really loved, because I feel like I should really love them, but I only really like them, just to put it simply. And I'll elaborate, because it's like irrefutable how much of a filmmaker, how much of a tactful filmmaker James Wan is. I mean, his brilliance is on display in these two movies. I mean, the shots, the way that he sort of is able to always keep the people in center frame. It's very similar to what Krasinski did with Quiet Place Part 2. As that movie got bigger and more grandiose, he could have turned it into, like we said in last week's podcast, a monster movie, a Cloverfield, where, you know, New York City's being torn apart. But instead it was characters' emotional facial reactions, body language in the foreground, monster mayhem in the background, and you had glimpses of it, but that wasn't what the story was about. And I feel like I say that because it could have gotten out of hand, it could have gotten zany and wacky, but Krasinski realized the focus was on the narrative and the characters, so he reined it in. And I think these films could have gotten zany, they could have gotten wacky, but I think Juan realized the story is about these characters, and again, he reined it in. So I think he's a great filmmaker. Like, I've loved everything I've seen him do, except I thought I was going to find my new favorite horror itch to scratch, and I didn't for some reason find that in these two movies. Now, the first one I thought was so much better than the second. I did feel the second time around, well, still gripping, still interesting, and I think filmmaking quality wise stronger. Obviously, that comes with budget, and the success of the first one obviously gives the second one more room to play. I thought it all was a better installment, but it felt tired. It felt a little. It felt a little. So I'm trep. I feel trepidation going into the third. But it's
Yeah.
strange because, like, I can't say a bad word about these movies either.
Right.
I just can't say I love
know
them,
what you're talking
and I
about.
hate being in this situation.
I know what you're talking about, because I have been in that situation a couple times actually, where I'm like, and I know exactly what you're talking about, where you're like, there's nothing bad that I can say about this movie from a craft level, because it's done on every single level, from a precision standpoint, from a lighting standpoint, from a sound standpoint, from a score standpoint, from an acting standpoint. There was nothing technically wrong with it, you know? But there's just something about it that doesn't emotionally click with me, right? And what I'll say is, and the reason why I don't necessarily have a problem, specifically with these movies, right? Not necessarily attributed to the rest of Juan's filmography, right? Because that's very varied. I'll get to that in a little bit. But because it reminds me of one of my favorite filmmakers, right? And it's because this guy is known for his technical brilliance, but not necessarily for his emotional relatability. But I still, for the most part, enjoy, very, very much so, all of his movies. And even though he doesn't nearly play with the small amount of budget that James Wan does, I will definitely say that there's a reason why Christopher Nolan is still as successful as he is, right? Because I will definitely say that very few I, for the most part, enjoy every one of Nolan's movies. You know, even Tenet. We obviously, you know, we obviously discussed that movie in length at the beginning of the year during the pandemic, but like even Tenet, I'm like, yeah, this is fucking awesome. You know,
I loved Tenet.
I loved it. I loved it the first time I saw it. I didn't understand the criticism. I'm like, bro, if you're a Nolan head, there was no reason why you should not like this movie. You know, I'm like, how is this any? I'm like, how the fuck is this movie any less incomprehensible than Inception was when that first came out? You know, obviously everyone now knows about Inception, but if you forget, when Inception came out, people were like very confused about that movie. You know, like that was just Nolan's thing. Nolan always has to be smarter than everyone else, right? That's fine, whatever. But you notice how obviously his movies don't always emotionally resonate with you, right? But that's fine, because like you don't have to emotionally resonate to every single movie that you see, right? Obviously the ones that you emotionally resonate and connect with are the ones that are going to make more of a statement and an impact on you, right? But I guess for me, if I can make another comparison to Hill House and say how this movie worked for me in a way that Hill House didn't, right? They're both movies that are predicated around the emotional turmoil of the family as opposed to just the scares, right? And that's what sets it apart, right? And that's what sets it up differently. The difference being is that while I thought Hill House got a little bit too bogged down in the characterizations to the point where it started to distract me from the overall plot, this movie never loses sight of it. I'm actually, specifically if we're talking about this first one, right? Because the interesting thing is that when we're first introduced to Ed and Lorraine in this movie, we're not introduced to them as the main characters, right? The main character that we follow for the majority of that first movie is the family that is being haunted. We spend a solid chunk of time with those characters before we bring Ed and
Pretty
Lorraine
much
back
the
into
whole
the fold.
first act.
Almost the entire first and into the beginning of the second act, right? And that's actually a really fascinating approach as far as that goes, right? And the fact that we're introduced to Ed and Lorraine in increments, right? That way, by the time they're brought into the plot, we're kind of like ready to go with like this squad. And also, right, as far as this is the only movie that I've seen that actually tries to tackle the ghost problem like head on and not at like the third act when they have no choice but to do so, right? They actually like actively, the majority of the second act, which I liked, is them actively trying to investigate it, them actually like explaining, right, like the series of ghosts, right? It's so hard to handle this type of exposition, right? Because otherwise you just become a book and it becomes boring. But again, Nolan, I think, handles that really well, and it is handled exceptionally well here as far as the explanation within the spirits, within like the type of realm. You know, it's explained in a way that that seems like it was written by real people, even though what they're essentially talking about is ridiculous. And that comes, I think, from the real life elements of it. I think that helps it a lot. But also, I think that the other compelling thing is the fact that when Ed and Lorraine are brought in, they're not just kind of like savior characters. You know, they're not Deus Ex Machinas. They are characters. They have like kind of emotional plights in and of themselves, right? And even though they might not necessarily be the focus of that, right? The fact that we still get to know them as time goes on, even as we continue to tackle these kind of like this almost anthological aspect that these movies take on, right? It really is impressive because like I don't think there's really any other movie franchise that I think the only other movie franchise, and again, it's weird that I'm making two comparisons to this franchise within a week apart from each other, is Mad Max, where you have this one character or this one set of characters that you're following, but each movie is a different setting and a different story within this world, right? I think it's actually like a really interesting way to continue to make this franchise natural, you know, to make a franchise naturalistic. And in a way, even though, you know, we as, you know, being the people that we are, don't like franchises that go on forever, right? It lends itself to that, right? Which, as we know, is something that Hollywood loves, especially with horror franchises, right? Because they can make them for so cheap.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. It makes sense. I think that, you know, while James Wan and Chris Nolan are different types of filmmakers, I think they're both masters of their craft. And now having seen as many James Wan films as I have, it makes sense watching how he sets this universe up. That Aquaman was as big of a hit as it was, because I mean, sure, we've seen Aquaman bits and pieces and BVS and a few other films prior, but I mean, that was his really first lead outing, and James Wan knocked it out of the park. Like, he was able to give you just as much information while keeping it interesting, while keeping you along for the narrative, and always in that film keeping you going to the end. And he does that so well in these movies.
Yeah.
And it almost, what you said, your point about, you know, the what was their names? The Warrens.
The Warrens,
The Warrens. Yeah, they are like one of my favorite comics by Robert Kirkman. I want to say one of his lesser knowns, but it's also a bestseller. The man has just too many hits that even some hits are so much bigger. It's like the Beatles.
Like the fact that we only know about Walking Dead and Invincible, but he's got like 20 or 30 other hits that like no one in mainstream knows about yet.
Yeah, Robert Kirkman to me is like the Beatles of comic book writing. It's like, sure, Hey Jude was a much bigger hit than Help, but Help is no slouch. It's a huge hit too, you know? And you know, Strawberry Fields is not as big as, you know, Let It Be, but it's still a huge song. Anyways, Kirkman has this comic called Outcast, and it's essentially very similar to
that one.
The Conjuring. Phenomenal read. I've read about, I think, 40 issues. They're probably in 60 in. It was just, it's so good. It's essentially this guy who is sort of like Vera Farmiga's character. She has these visions, and she can sort of communicate, and he teams up with the priest, and they go through and they perform exorcisms, but they're not superheroes, right? Like, they're not being called in to instantly solve the problem. They figure it out. They go through the trials and tribulations. They fail, and then they come back again. They have their sort of like dark night of the soul. It's there's realism in it, and I think that translates to Conjuring, because I feel the same way about the Warrens. However, as strongly as I feel about the Warrens as I imagine they were written on the page, I think that they're actually the weakest part of the film, because I just don't buy their performances. They feel very flat to me, and it's strange because I love Bates Motel. It is one of my favorite TV shows. I stuck with that show from season 1 to season 5. I thought it was phenomenal. I've rewatched it again under my critical eye, and it still holds up. She is so great in that show, Vera Farmiga.
Vera Farmiga's awesome.
I just think she's a little flat in this role, and I think it's because it seems like it's so smart to have the family be at the center of it, but I almost think that there was some wasted, like, I don't think we needed to know their daughter. I don't think we needed to see the family at their house. I think we could have cut all of that out from the first film and saved it for the second one, having that ending sequence where Annabelle gets out of the cage, and then we realize, okay, the second one's going to be a little more Warren centric out the gates, as it is.
Right.
And I just think, I don't know. It's still, I would say, like a perfect horror film, but I just don't buy them. And it's so
Right.
strange to me because I'm saying it's a perfect horror film, the first Conjuring. I really think it is, but something about it just falls short, and I can't
Yeah.
put my eye on it. I
Yeah, I
can't put
get
a
it.
pin
Now,
on it.
here's my only question for you before I get into my last James Wan point is, do you think that if there was no sequel to The Conjuring, right? Forget, obviously, again, like if you just had that first Conjuring movie without the second one, right? Do you know if you would have the same thoughts?
No, I think I also think, and this is my sort of the way that I can justify the fact that they are perfect. At least the first one is a perfect horror film. It's because I remember really liking, in well, I remember really enjoying my time with The Nun, even though it wasn't the strongest film when I saw it in theaters. And I think had I had watched this film in theaters, because movies are made for the theaters, right? I think that
At least they
with
were.
how perfect of a movie it is, I think there would have always have been some of that night out movie moment, movie magic feeling that the theatrical experience would have given me, that even my most trained film critical eye would never be able to see past. And I think some types of entertainment are meant to be binged. Some movies are meant to be put on a streaming service. Others need to be put in theaters and need to be seen to as close as that experience as possible. And for me personally, someone who cherishes the theater experience as much as I've grown to, I totally think that if I would have been able to see these films in theaters, there would be no hesitation to call them a perfect horror film. And because I can see past that and know the fault in my logic there, I'll still say that. I just think it shows how important the theater experience is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does
Yeah,
that make
definitely.
sense? Did I make sense there?
No, I get what you're saying as far as that goes. I get you 100%. And what's interesting is the fact that it's so weird because I can't really comment on that because at the time, not only would I have never seen a movie like this in theaters back in 2013, I didn't see that many movies in theaters. Like if I pull up my letterbox off the top of my head, I can like count on one hand the amount of movies that I saw in theaters in 2013, because the irony of the matter is the fact that even though I am devoutly a religious fanatic when it comes to movies, I did not watch that many movies in theaters as a kid, just because it's just something my parents just weren't about, like off the top of my head, I saw Man of Steel, The Wolverine, Iron Man 3, and Now You See Me, and this terrible, terrible movie called Paranoia for my birthday. I have a really bad track record with watching movies on my birthday. I'll get to that when we get to my birthday live stream. And that was it. Those are the only movies that I saw in theaters in 2013. And that should tell you something as far as like, kind of like the reason why I kind of revere the theaters and that feeling that you get from seeing them in theaters so much,
And that's why I'm gonna be a little mad at myself maybe if I watch this one tonight at home, and I just
don't, because
I don't want to, because I know James Wan isn't the director here, so
right,
I'm already
but look,
expecting a
it's
lesser
like you
quality,
said though. It's like you said though. Some movies are meant to be binged, and some movies are meant to be seen in theaters. And the problem is, you don't know until you actually, watch the movie. That's the thing that sucks. Hindsight is 2020, but it's still hindsight. You never know. The only thing that I really have left to add to this is just how much James Wan has been able to impress me as a filmmaker, right? Because literally, no joke, I had never even heard of this guy until the 7th Fast and Furious movie came out, when he was being announced to replace Justin Lin, right? I'm like, oh, I have no idea who this guy is, right? And then I saw Furious 7. And then obviously, again, I was still kind of focused on the whole Paul Walker thing of it at the time. But like, I think the biggest thing to me from our rewatch that really put this into perspective, now knowing who James Wan is and now knowing more of his sensibilities as a filmmaker, is I'm like, wow, it impressed me how much of like a well-made film this is, not only just for a blockbuster and with all the behind-the-scenes problems that film had to overcome, but just like as the fact that like so much of the time now, right, we see these small little known indie directors that have like one or two small movies get scooped up and put into the studio system before they have a chance to actually stretch and flex as a filmmaker. And the fact that Juan is like one of the few ones to come out unscathed, not only just with just one, but two gigantic blockbusters that really do, I would say, set themselves apart from the bunch. I'm sorry, you cannot tell me that Fast and Furious 7 and Aquaman remind you of the typical generic ilk of blockbusters that come out. You know, those films have their flaws, don't get me wrong. But, like, you cannot tell me that the way that those movies are shot and the way those movies are characterized and the tone of those movies reminds you of other, like, more generic blockbusters. They just don't, you know? No. And it's the fact that he has had quite a long history, right? Since that first Saw movie, not just of directing, but producing as well, because his movies he directed between the first Saw and Fast and Furious include Dead Silence, Dead Sentence, Insidious, Conjuring, Insidious Chapter 2, and then he's got Conjuring 2 right after Fast and Furious 7. Like, that's nothing to slouch at. You know, he effectively jump-started two gigantic horror franchises, one of which spawned an entire cinematic universe, right? Because that's the thing that we haven't really talked about yet with these Conjuring movies. These movies have what? Like 4 spin-offs, like the 3 Annabelle movies, Curse of La Llorona, and The Nun? Like, what?
I think we'll be able to better speak to that after we watch the third film and get another one of this franchise under our belt. But you're totally right, man. Like, James Wan is becoming one of my favorite filmmakers working today.
And he's got a new movie coming out this year. Like this movie is not his, right? But he's actually got a new horror movie coming out later this year called Malignant. I have no idea what it's going to be about. And honestly, just based off what I know about Wan now, I can't wait for it because...
No. Me neither. And you know what I've noticed? The films he produces on
are great too.
Some of them are a lower bar of quality, like The Nun. But I do have to say, though, that movie still cinematically is beautiful. It's stunning. You know, he produced on Mortal Kombat 2021. For what it was, that was still a great film. Although, of course, if we're talking about like prestige, it doesn't come anywhere
right.
near that,
and also debatable like, still if it's a great film. But like, I get what you're coming from though, as far as like the look of it.
It's amazing.
Yes, I agree.
And I think he knows how to. I think he knows how to achieve the goal that is set for him and that he sets when he goes out to like specific, like he knows how to work for whatever project he's in at the moment.
Yes.
So the last thing I want to ask you before we jump to our other topics is, are you excited for The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It?
Okay, so it's tricky because it's a little bit of a loaded question because the problem is that I'm very, very much looking forward to Malignant later this year. That I'm super excited for. But it's not only just that, it's a couple things. Number one, not only is Juan not directing this one, right? Even though I did very much enjoy the first 2 Conjuring movies, it's the fact that the guy who's directing it is the guy who directed Curse of La Llorona, which I heard is, of all these Conjuring movies, one of the lesser good ones. So that's why, while I'm not excited for it, I can't say that I'm like super looking forward to it, especially given that like Juan sets such a bar of quality, and then I'm like, oh, you know,
this is Malignant, or this is
Malignant. So I'm talking for Conjuring 3, right? As far as my excitement goes, Malignant is the one that he's directing that's coming out later this year in September.
So you're excited for Conjuring 3 then?
I'm looking forward to watching it.
Producer on it.
I'm looking forward to watching it. I can't say I'm excited about it. I'm more excited about it than I was before I'd seen the first 2 Conjuring movies, right?
No, I think, you know, one thing I've noticed as directors produce, really Michael Bay's styles are not in Quiet Place. I'm sure he's there for guidance. I'm sure he's there for funding. And I'm sure he's there to help with all the other different aspects of the filmmaking process, the different behind the scenes things that a director just simply can't take on by himself. But he clearly is not stepping on the toes of Krasinski's vision. And I think James Wan, when he produces, you can clearly see stylistically how he, as a director, is far different from him as a producer.
Yes.
I think it's actually a very great thing, though. It's a respectful. I think it's he knows how to play his role, whatever role that is in the production. I think it speaks to him being able to service, whether it's Aquaman hitting the beats that needs to hit, or if it's The Conjuring hitting the exact beats that needs to hit.
Yes.
But so that's why I think, personally for me, I am excited. These first 2 movies were great. I think, while it's strange that I can't profess the love I want to for them, I still really enjoyed them. But I'm also nervous because Wan's not in the director chair, and that's a completely different James Wan for me.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it, man. I get it. Yeah, so I guess I don't really want to speak to anything else until we actually watch the next Conjuring movie as far as that goes. But yeah, so those are our thoughts really on the Conjuring movies. So as far as the next topic goes, I mean, I'm pretty sure I called this. I don't remember if I called this on the show, but I definitely told you just from the pure fact of like how many people or how few people are talking about Jupiter's Legacy. Just about, I'm like, yeah, this show's not getting a second season, right? You know, like there's situations, right? Like the Glow, like there's a reason why we keep bringing up Glow as far as kind of the go-to example, because even though like Netflix has developed like a really bad pattern of this, the whole thing about Glow is the fact that they were shooting the 4th season and they deliberately used the pandemic as an excuse to not bring that show back, right? It's not like it was a situation of where that show was on its first season to do well. That show had 3 seasons and was getting the thing. Like it's the same thing, right? Kind of of why we're so pissed at Kim's. It's the same situation of what happened there, because it's like it's the fact that we didn't get closure. That's what annoys me so much about the Glow situation. So I can't say necessarily that Jupiter's Legacy, the cancellation, surprises me just because of like how they were treating that story, and just because I'm like, oh no, this is committing all sorts of sins that Netflix first seasons do, and the writing just seemed to be on the wall, because literally, I mean, I feel like our earlier videos like demonstrated this. Nobody was talking about this show. Like, I didn't see a single Reddit post, not a single Screen Rant article, nothing. Nobody was talking about this show. But the reason why we bring it up is because, just like so many other Netflix seasons we've talked about, the scenario behind the continuation of this show is ridiculous. Because first, they're saying to Mark Millar, hey, we're going to continue with this certain characters from this universe, but in animated format. Next thing you know, they're like, oh, it's another Mindhunter situation, because we took so long deliberating whether we were going to bring it back or not, we just let the actors go from their contract, which I'm like, I still don't understand the logic behind that. Like, that's probably something that I'm like, yeah, I would need to be in the money rooms and see the accounting behind that in order to see how that makes financial sense. But like, just from an artistic lens, I'm like, what? Like, because it's the second time this has happened as far as that goes. And I know Netflix is super flexible when it comes to this thing, but like, so that's why I can't really say that the Jupiter's Legacy cancellation surprises me, not one bit. But not to mention that now they've just announced another series, right? And they're doing that thing like they did when they made the deal with Ryan Murphy, which is where they're making these kind of, not anthology, but really like kind of one-off mini-series, right? And that's fine, but I'm really, really getting sick of them announcing shows but leaving them up to chance of like, oh, they might get a second season or not. It's like, no, don't do that. Tell us that they're getting a second season, renew it, or cancel it. Don't do this weird down-the-middle bullshit thing. It's like, well, what are your thoughts on it? Like, you're the comic guy. You were able to speak to that much better, I feel like, on our podcast than I was as far as the whole comic relationship. So, like, talk to me about the kerfuffle of Netflix doing that. And these networks continuing to making these baffling decisions when it comes to how they're canceling, quote-unquote, these shows.
Well, that's the thing. Netflix isn't a network. They're a streaming service, and they
Yeah.
play by their own rules.
Yeah.
And it's a set of rules that, when it's like one of those things where it's like just when you think you start to understand it, they change the game right from under
Clearly.
you, and it's okay, because because they justify it as like, hey, you know, we don't have to tell you our numbers, we don't have to tell you how many people watch something, we don't have to tell you where the money goes. Just know your subscription funds whatever we choose to do. It's the Wild West streaming.
Yeah, it really is.
And
it's fun, but it gets annoying at times, you know?
it does get annoying when quality art suffers.
Right.
In the case of Jupiter's Legacy,
Right.
then
Can't
it's
say
not
that applies to
quality
this
art.
one, but
Glow definitely was.
Yeah.
And so I think Jupiter's Legacy had large issues. I know we didn't talk about
Yeah.
our thoughts on the finale. I know that's not what we're here to do right now,
Right.
but I will say, when your B storyline is way more interesting than your A storyline,
yeah, that's a problem. That is a problem.
and more specifically when that B storyline is a flashback, so it doesn't even take place in the same time frame of which you're really trying to sell us on. Big issue.
Big
Performances kind of weak.
Yeah.
Like the set design, the budget, all weak. Just not what you want. It was like a CW on steroids. A little better, but not. Still, you put a CW show on steroids, still not the greatest thing. And so it didn't surprise me. What shocked me, though, however, was this Millarverse getting greenlit. So we cancel Jupiter's Legacy, and we instantly announce that, hey, we're not done with Millar. We're pivoting to another one of his shows.
I'm gonna have to talk about that real quick, because what confused me about that was that I had thought that they'd already announced that. I thought the whole point of when they made the deal with Millar was the fact that they were doing Millarverse, right? And they were having these multiple properties of his getting adapted, right? So that's what's confused me, right? But like to kind of use the Jupiter's Legacy cancellation as a thing to bounce off of in order to announce the Millarverse, that's what's confusing to me as far as that goes. But I'm like, I thought they already announced they were doing multiple properties based off of his stuff, you know?
Yeah, but they actually confirmed it officially now. It's like the thing with Netflix, and I'm kind of talking to Dustin about it right now in the chat because Dustin gives a great example of where I was going to go with my whole take on this Jupiter's Legacy cancellation and the Netflix of it all. So Dustin, which thank you for joining the stream as always, brother. He said, didn't they announce a Kick-Ass series like a year ago? And I was like, I'm not sure. And he goes, just checked. It was just hearsay. Like, that is the perfect thing. Like, Netflix was kind of considering it, someone was kind of considering it, and they were in talks, but it never happened. It's like, it's officially confirmed now that we're getting this Mark Millar show, but the buzz was out there for so long. I think Netflix is... So when they first started out, it was very loose, it was free flying, it was hot off the press by the seat of your pants guerrilla marketing. And that was great when they were the only name in town.
Right.
They were the only show to watch in town on streaming, right? Because they've been here since the beginning. They are the start of the streaming wars. But now that the game has been refined, now that the ante has been upped, the stakes are higher, right? There's way more competitors.
We talked about that a lot last year during the during the fall of the pandemic when all these streaming services were getting off the ground.
There's far more players in the game. I think we're starting to see how Netflix, well, they're still a big part of the industry. They still, I'd say, have a corner of this streaming wars, a sizable corner carved out. They don't own the whole thing anymore. And I think that this whole sort of, hey, the rumor mill keeps turning, I think it's starting to not bode so strongly for them.
Yeah. And I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of happy about that because I hated the rumor mill to begin with. I always hate the rumor mill just surrounding movies in general.
Right. But, and I agree. But first of all, you can't trust them anymore.
Right.
I mean, even if you were one of the few who watched this show, and then in regards to that, one of the fewer who enjoyed it, that's still probably tens of thousands of people. Netflix has an astronomical amount of subscribers, and they did push it. It was in the top 10 trending. People watched it. We know that. Critics didn't cover it. It wasn't well received by the press, but normal people still watched it. A handful of them probably still really enjoyed it. That isn't something you want to give your subscribers. And what I mean by that is you don't want to give them doubt that I can get invested in this show. I'm a TV lover. I'm afraid to go out to theaters right now, especially because of the pandemic. And you're offering me content weekly that is strictly to your service. That's why I'm paying for it now, because we know original content is the way everything's moving. And yet every time I enjoy something, you cancel it. Glow, Travelers, Jupiter's Legacy. It's like all these small cult following shows that people get invested in, people really love. The second they start to go somewhere, the second we have a reveal, the second we finally get some answers, it's gone. It's canceled. It's just not a good precedent to set.
Yeah.
And I think the company, the corporatization of Netflix really needs to figure out how to work with creators and then how to translate a better sort of standing to an audience, because it's kind of like what's happening right now with Warner Brothers, right? Warner Brothers has so many directors who don't want to work with them, and of course the trickle-down effect goes to actors and different types of producers and all that stuff, because who's not going to work with them anymore? This past year alone, they lost, Denis Villeneuve, however you say
Denis
his last
Villeneuve,
name,
yeah.
and Chris Nolan alone, two powerhouses. Robert Pattinson just signed a first look deal. Okay, so that's things looking up. They're putting a little money in a big name's pocket. But I mean, that's the first positive step they've made towards transparency. Netflix, we've never even had a light bulb in that. I mean, they're literally, I imagine there's no lights in that corporate building. They all have night vision built into their eyes, because you felt like we've always been completely in the dark. I just think I think Netflix, if they keep this pattern up, which, by the way, all the reviews I looked up, it's like, surprise, surprise, Netflix cancels another show out of nowhere. Do you want that? Do you want that to be the way people think about you?
And I'll add to that point one step further, because my whole thing with it is that Well, I don't necessarily agree entirely with the whole thing with creators, because if you talk to any creator, for the most part, they all say, like, yeah, Netflix is a great place to work. They're totally hands-off. They let us do whatever we want as far as that goes. So I don't necessarily know if it's a thing with creators, right? I think it's more so a thing of they just need to figure out what it is that they want from their content, right? Because the interesting thing about them, right, if we're just talking specifically about Netflix, is the fact that, for the most part, the content that works. It's just shit that we don't watch, because we don't watch the stuff from them that works. It's the typical generic schlocky CW stuff, or the foreign content that we don't watch. You know, obviously, we were talking the other day when you were over at my house before I left about the Norwegian kind of market that they're dipped to, but they're also dipped heavily into the telenovela market. You know, there's this show Money Heist that's going, that's on its 5th season right now, and I have not heard a single person watch that, you know?
Netflix also prematurely canceled Lilyhammer, which was their biggest Norwegian show.
Yep.
We did not get the ending we deserved, that 4th and final season. We have this show right now that I love, which is still with that whole Norwegian sort of production company of actors. I can't pronounce the name. It's in Norwegian, but Netflix has 3 shows, Lilyhammer, Ragnarok now, and Norseman. And we'll see. Norseman's 3rd season, which just concluded, which is also one of my top shows of the year so far, it has the need for a 4th season. Will it get it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's on Netflix.
Because the only show so far that's begotten a 4th season is fucking Ozark, which is just deplorable as far as that goes. But
I think Jason Bateman has the best, like, producer.
I think so. Whatever deal he signed in order to, like, start producing shows, he nailed it as far as that goes. Yeah. But that's really the only thing that I have to say as far as that goes. Again, the whole Jupiter's Legacy cancellation, I'm not going to really talk much about it because, again, I can't say I was entirely surprised. I think a lot of people saw it coming. It's just a matter of, man, it's just annoying the fact that we can't, that Netflix is continuing to do this and make these easy mistakes that are so easy to avoid as far as that goes. So,
but I want to pose the question to the chat.
Yeah.
Do you guys feel the way that I feel? Like, can you trust Netflix anymore? Does it frustrate you? Is it just the critics who complain about that? Maybe we just, obviously, we love this medium. We're very involved in it. But, I mean, like, what do you guys think? Our community, let us know. And, of course, subscribe, hit the bell to turn on notifications so you never miss when we go live. And please give this video a thumbs up because it would really help us keep doing what we do. We have a few more topics, Tom.
Yes, a few more topics. So, the whole theater of it all, right? So, Chris, I'm assuming that you've got the numbers posted, right? So, how much money did the theaters churn out this weekend?
The box office had its first $100 million weekend in 14 months.
Fuck yeah!
That's
so.
Huge.
I don't necessarily know if that's like an immediate sign of like, yes, theaters are back. You know, we can all start going out in droves, but like that's definitely a good sign. That's definitely a good sign, I would say.
On that before I chime in. Like, what does this tell you?
I think it's a good sign. I don't necessarily know if like there's anything that's telling yet because again, I think it's still too soon to tell. But this is definitely, I feel like, kind of played into my theory that I've had, that I think that everyone that was worried about whether theaters would do well or not when things started to open up, I think that their worry was kind of for naught. I think that I'm like, yeah, trust me, people are sick of being inside. People want to go out. People want to socialize. They are tired of having been stuck inside for a year. I don't care what anyone tells me. There's only so much the fear state can go on as far as that goes. Only people are social animals by nature. They're going to get sick of this and start to, go out soon regardless. And yeah, this is just a complete reinforcement of that to me as far as that goes. Like, the other good thing too, which again is smart, is the fact that because they had so many movies that were delayed, but also because so many of like kind of the smaller movies that would have bombed in theaters are going straight to streaming now, and it's pretty much like they have marketed, they have kind of learned all the right lessons about like the types of movies that do well in theaters. Not to mention the fact that for the most part, for the majority of the beginning of the year, there has been no competition strictly in theaters from the Marvel and the DC soaking away all of those numbers, right? Snyder Cut was a direct-to-streaming drop, and we're still not getting a Marvel movie until Black Widow, and even when that comes out, Black Widow is debuting simultaneously on Disney+. So it's kind of nice, right? As far as seeing that refreshing feeling, right? The fact that something other than a Marvel or a DC movie or a Star Wars, right, can make money in theaters, right? And the fact that we've gotten, even though we hated it, right? The fact that Spiral can make money in theaters. The fact that A Quiet Place Part 2 can make money in theaters, right? And all the other movies that we have coming out, right? It's tricky because June is for the most part primarily streaming drops, but still, like Conjuring 3, In the Heights, Fast and Furious 9. Once we start to get into July, we'll start to get into more of those franchises. But the thing that my takeaway, right, because box office is box office, right? I think that to try and look at what movies do well, I think is dumb, because when it's an original idea, you never know what's going to do well as far as theaters go. You know, Marvel had to work like a long time before it became like the way that it was. My whole thing that just makes me happy is the fact that people are still hungry to go out and watch movies in theaters. They may not necessarily be great, but the fact that they're still willing to go out and watch movies is what's got me really, really excited about this news.
Yeah, that's huge, and let me tell you, Quiet Place grossed over 40 million, and Cruella grossed over 20 million, and those are the two big breadwinners that contributed the most to this big weekend. Obviously, it being their debut weekends, and that tells me that if these kind of like, let's be honest, Cruella was kind of like a Disney throwaway film,
Yeah,
like another Aladdin.
it was.
Unfortunately, they for every film they handle right,
Yeah.
there's a lot they
And
mishandle.
it's so funny to me too, because like I even though Raya was an infinitely better movie than Cruella and still got like the same like release schedule, I still feel like there was no marketing around Raya versus there was a shit ton of marketing around Cruella. I don't understand what Disney's thought process is as far as like marketing certain of their movies, but like I just wanted
Yeah.
to point that out, because like I felt like I
No.
couldn't escape from the Cruella trailers like when I first started going back to theaters versus even on YouTube I didn't see a single Raya trailer, you know?
Yeah, I feel the same exact way. And it's just like, but where I was going with that is these are two non-Marvels, two non-DC, two non-major action franchise, two non-major horror franchise. These are very much so two films that, yeah, one has attached to the success of its predecessor in A Quiet Place, and the other has the machine of Disney behind it, but it's not the big ticket items that, normally produce, big weekends. And so while this was in past times considered a bad weekend at the box office, it's still our first $100 million weekend. And again, we have not had one of the big hitters come to bat yet. It's good signs. I think it really is good
Yeah.
signs, man. I mean,
No, I'm looking forward
like
to it.
the reason I kind of was really glad we had that whole little sort of bonus HBO topic before we really got into what was on the agenda for the show tonight. Like I said, Conjuring, I think for as much as I like them, I needed to see it in theaters, and I think there's a lot you're gonna lose a lot, man. The industry overall might not suffer right away, but if we eventually lose theaters, if they don't recover, man, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt the art. It's gonna hurt the way we
Yeah.
perceive the art. And it's I think, and eventually it's gonna look, if you can't pump money into these movies, they're not gonna look as good, sound as good, and make us feel as great about ourselves after watching them as they do.
Yep.
And
Yep,
we
it's
needed
true.
this.
We
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 needed this
talked about
weekend.
it. We talked about it a lot during the pandemic. Is the fact that streaming, as much as we love it, with the certain of the quality that we were getting, streaming is largely. I mean, pirating was already like a big contributor to this, but streaming even more so was again it. It's inevitable as far as that goes, right? Because like there's nothing really we can say about it. It is the primary contributor to the continuing disposability of media, right? We really needed theaters back in order to kind of, get that sensation, that special feeling that we get from movies anymore, because we talked about this numerous times. It doesn't matter how good a movie is. If it's on streaming, it doesn't feel the same. And if there's one thing that makes me feel really good, it's the fact that the pandemic people didn't lose that feeling of movies during the pandemic, right? Because there was a long time where I was worried. I'm like, oh no, people are going to become too used to this. They're not going to ever want to go back to a theater after this. And it's been a growing concern of mine for the last couple of years. But you can imagine my relief, I'll say, when not only did it prove that these last couple of weeks proved that like the hunger for movies is even stronger now than it's ever been, specifically in theaters, but also the fact that it's kind of allowing people to weed through the movies that, in all honesty, even though I like them, did not deserve to go to theaters, right? Because the shitty thing is that all the quality movies that are all our favorite movies, right, that I would have loved to watch in theaters, those movies were already finding their way to streaming long before streaming was even really becoming a big thing. So the only movies that were left that were going to theaters that weren't the spectacle movies were these really, really terrible, like shitty, schlocky movies. So the fact that like we can get rid of some of those types of movies and only focus on the movies that are worth seeing in theaters, like I'm all for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, sort of speaking to the Netflix of it all from the previous segment, where I think they need to curate their films heavier and make better choices about their products and treat their products with more care and make better decisions around them. I think just natural selection will sort of in tune filter out the good films that deserve the theater experience and the ones that just go straight to streaming. It's going to be a different landscape because I do think for as many of us who, like myself, have the bug of going to the theaters again, who even though HBO Max is offering Conjuring 3, was really trying to make plans to go see it in theaters, because I just forgot how good it was to be out there with my friends. And then I finally did it again, and I was like, yeah, this is how you got to do it. This is what you need.
Yeah.
And but I still think for as many of us that fall on our side of the aisle, there are a bunch who are going to be more hesitant.
Right.
And so the landscape's going to be different, but it's kind of in the filmmaker's hands now. Nolan said he was never going to work with with Warner Brothers again. Villeneuve said he was never going to work with Warner Brothers again because of this whole debacle in regards to their movies. Prove it. Go out there and fight for your art now, and make sure that you're best represented as you possibly can be. And it's the landscape. It's almost like we're going to get back to the traditional theater going experience, but the behind the scenes, the red tape of Hollywood is going to be completely different. And honestly, I think there's going to be conflict and stories to report on like we're doing right now. But I think it's going to, in the long term, kind of make for a better curated theater going experience.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm looking forward to it.
No, I am absolutely, because again, like as much as I did enjoy all of kind of those little movies that I watched in like September and October of like 2015 and 2016, right? A lot of those movies, I'm like, yeah, we didn't need this. I'm like, I didn't need to spend money and watch this in a theater. Like there were I could name like 5 off the cuff that I watched. I'm like, I watched Goosebumps, Everest, A Walk in the Woods, like movies
Call of the Wild?
What?
Call of the Wild?
No, I did not watch that. Not that. Definitely not that. But no, like I was like, I'm like, man, I'm like, it's crazy. I'm like, not a single person in our age range, or really just in general, has heard of these movies, but I still vividly remember watching them because I watched them in a theater, But at the same, because that's just the power that the theater has. But at the same time, I'm like, these didn't need to be theater drops, Yes, A Walk in the Woods. I watched that in theaters, and I still enjoy that movie. It is a delightful little movie, but it did not need to be in theaters. That is a movie that, if it were made today, instantly would have gone to streaming. And
like Black Bear, right? Wasn't that the best experience we had watching that?
Yeah.
In your basement?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know. Was it better than Climax or The Lighthouse?
Those come close.
Right?
Yeah,
like, come
true.
on. Come on.
Climax
But Black Bear was dope.
Films.
Yeah. But which is funny because, again, Black Bear is a movie that I would have loved to have watched in theaters. But, like, it's tricky, right? I feel like we don't need to go into, like, a case-by-case basis of, like, every movie that, like, we should have watched in theaters versus going to streaming, right? But the one thing that I can say is the fact that I'm just really glad that for the most part, and again, this is really just the only exception because, again, we're sitting through a year that is essentially making up for last year. So we'll see if this trend continues as time goes on. But, like, for the most part, that we've only got, like, bangers going forward, And not necessarily bangers in terms of quality, bangers in terms of entertainment. Because even though we fucking despised Spiral, we still had a blast watching it in theaters.
Yeah, exactly. I think, look, just to conclude here and start to wrap things up, it's a great sign. It gives
really
me
is.
happiness as a fan. It gives me peace of mind, Like, I want to get back to normal. People are vaccinated now at this point. They say on the news, all the different news outlets, you're only not vaccinated if you don't want to be. In America, at least, the option's there, and I want to get back to hanging out with my friends, watching a movie, going to a diner afterwards, and having a good time and just enjoying the night, And I'm getting back to that, and it feels great. And I'm glad that we're not the only ones. Like, this is what this tells me. $100 million weekend, we're not the only ones. It's nice to know that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's beyond refreshing as far as that goes, and I honestly can't wait because, dude, well, first off, I just want to go into a little bit of a tangent, but first off, this might be the first August in my entire life existence where we don't just get like 1, maybe 2 great movies. Bro, the movies that we're covering for the podcast in August are Green Knight, Suicide Squad, Free Guy, Reminiscence, and Candyman. I have never been more excited for a birthday month for me for movies than I have been this year. You know?
Green Knight just looks killer.
Green Knight, which is A24, Suicide Squad, which I've made the boldest statement that this is going to be the best DC film since The Dark Knight, possibly better than The Dark Knight. I still stand by that statement. I don't care how many people come at me in the comments. That is one of those hot takes that I make, but I don't care because that's how much I believe in Gunn.
I got to call AJ.
Because that's how much I believe. That's how much I believe in James Gunn, you know? And I also think it's fucking hilarious that John Cena is gonna get 2 nominations for our own personal nominations this year. He's gonna get fucking terrible for Fast 9, and he's gonna get supporting actor comedy for the Suicide Squad. And Free Guy.
Let me just address one thing.
Yes.
I think it's crazy to say a comic book movie can be that type of caliber. I think the medium's been entirely depreciated.
But again, that's only because
that's just how I feel personally.
I agree with you, but if only because, like I said, of all the people, right, who go into this space and don't have that style that stands out, Gunn to me is the only one. He's the only one
and I agree with that
actually had an immediate, like, a style. It's the reason why people gravitate towards the Guardians of the Galaxy movies more than any other Marvel movie. You know, you can't name me a single other, not even Black Panther, which has Ryan Coogler all over it. Not even Black Panther to me is as visually distinct and tonally apparent, you know, as the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, you know? Even that movie, that's probably the only other one that I would think of. And then Free Guy, which just looks fun. Reminiscence, which is from the Westworld creators, and I love that kind of trippy mind stuff. And even if that movie's bad, I'm still looking forward to it because I've loved following Hugh Jackman's career post X-Men because it's been really fascinating and really awesome. And then wrapping up the month with Candyman, which is either going to be fantastic or it's going to suck. And it's not going to be anywhere but in the middle. And it's not going to be anywhere in the middle. It's only going to be at one of those two. And either way, I cannot fucking wait for it. Because did you know, I don't know if you knew, did you know that the director of this new Candyman movie is directing the upcoming Captain Marvel 2?
Beautiful. I did not know that. That's incredible.
That's what I mean. Because either way, it's a win. Because if the movie is awesome, then I'm like, okay, we might, this director, chances are probably not, but this director might have a chance to make Captain Marvel 2, right? I still like the first Captain Marvel, but this director might have the chance to make Captain Marvel 2, or sorry, the Marvels, because Marvel's trying to get rid of Brie Larson, something different and interesting and unique if they have an interesting take. And if it fucking sucks, but in like the schlocky, really hilariously over-the-top way that the first Candyman was, not that that movie was bad, but I'm talking in terms of like the pulp factor of it, then I'm like, oh, she could turn Captain... I'm like, she could make the next Captain Marvel a legitimately bad movie. Not a movie that people didn't like because of, like, the politics surrounding the movie, but an actually legitimately bad Marvel movie, which I'm not gonna lie, I've kind of been waiting for a really long time because I know they can't maintain their seamlessly flawless track record forever. I'm like, either way, it's a win-win scenario. So, and the fact that that's wrapping up August... Oh no, I did, and I still fucking despise that movie. But there are still parts that I enjoy. I very much like the extra. The extras in that movie are still hilarious. Also, Tony Stark single-handedly best one-liner in the entire Marvel-verse is in that movie. So that's where I'll give Iron Man 3 credit. You know.
Fair enough.
Not saying it's a good movie at all. I still fucking hate that movie, but.
Well, Dom, I think we did it.
Yeah, man, we did it. And hey, Spectrum didn't crash on me. Not yet. You know, I probably just jinxed it for future streams, but hey,
yeah,
it's a sign.
One of the only streamers to ever use Spectrum and say that. So
right?
I wish you all the best. Personally, I have a
fingers crossed, man. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, Don, this was a great stream.
Yeah, man, it was. I'm glad. Like I said, gives me some semblance of normalcy back in like these constantly shifting times for me. But man, like I'm glad to be back, and I can't wait to get like back on the consistent podcasting schedule here. You know, like so, guys, stay tuned obviously for more future content from us. Let us know what you thought of this, you know, variety stream that we had tonight. You know, continue to again. This is the free form. This is where we just basically talk about anything. So basically, whatever topics you want us to talk about, right? Throw them at us. You know, like we might have. We haven't done a Q&A in a while. We might do that coming up soon. You know, we've got so much more content coming to you guys. Again, our podcast topic for this week is Conjuring 3. We've got the next Fast and Furious. We're getting there, Chris. We just put out 5 this week, you know, so we're getting there. We've only got 3 of these left before we get to the finish line at the end of the month. F9, it's coming, people. Oh, man, dude, if half the shit I've heard about this movie is true, this, to me, is going to be the make or break in this franchise for both of us, I feel like, you know? So, yeah, that's the only thing that I'm going to add on there, people. Thanks once again for tuning into our podcast. Be sure to click the subscribe button. click the like button, leave a comment below, click the bell next to the subscribe button so that way you guys can get notified every time we put up new content. Be sure to also follow us on our Facebook and Instagram at Talkin TV Podcast on both. Chris, where can the good people find you?
Yeah, they can find me, of course, at all the same places that you can find the Talkin TV podcast. My personal pages are at Christian Evanko. Evanko spelled Evanko. I make music, which I really enjoy, and I hope you guys would check it out through the link in my bio. And I also have another podcast called Talkin' with Andrew and Chris, which is also available through the link in my bio. And Talkin' is spelled the same way we spell it right here on Talkin TV. So, yeah, I mean, I hope to see you guys there. It'd be a pleasure to have you join me on those journeys and an honor to have you tag along. And Dom, what about you, man? Where can they find you?
Absolutely. And Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram. I think it's funny. I think the other day I just posted how I finally noticed, like 5 years later than everyone else, how Mark Duplass and Ron Livingston are another pair of Hollywood duplicates in the never-ending game of the Hollywood doppelgangers. Oh, man, dude, I've got a whole list, you know? I'm not going to dive too far into the conspiracy theory train, but one of these days I'm going to do a video of, like, all of the Hollywood doppelgangers, and I'm gonna have visual proof. I'm gonna have visual aid. I'm like, bro, look between these two pictures. Tell me they're the difference. And if you notice the difference, you're a fucking liar. You know, like I'm like, there are it's too many. There's too many of them for it to not be something.
Before Dom officially jumps off the deep end, everyone.
Bro, wait a minute. You think that I haven't already? You've been doing this podcast with me for 2 years now, and you don't think I haven't dropped off the deep end yet?
I give you credit. All right.
I
give you credit. I don't think you've fully gone off the deep end.
All right, well, you give me more credit than I give myself because as far as I'm concerned, I jumped off the deep end the minute that I, was born. But hey, to each his own as far as that goes. People, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Be sure to tune in next week for the next Talkin TV variety stream. And as always, you guys know the sign off. From my new place here in sunny Oswego, New York, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.